Só um momentinho. Pronto.
Recebendo aqui feedback, a Regina Silveira está no site, assistindo pelo site. Então, porque a transmissão tá ocorrendo pelo site da exposição, mas também pelo IEA, pela homepage do IEA e pela homepage do Fórum Permanente. Então, quem se perder pelo site, porque o site é um pouco, ele tem uma navegação um pouco mais complicada, né? Que precisa da ajuda dos universitários de acordo com a Macaé, mas o acesso realmente mais fácil é pelos sites do IEA e do Fórum, né? Isso. Uma navegação um pouco mais complicada. Eu não sei se eu estou no ar aí. Já estou no ar?
Está no ar, professor.
Ah, muito bem. Ok, obrigado. Bom, boa tarde a todos e a todas.
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Good afternoon to all. It's a great pleasure to begin this meeting, Titans meeting, where Titans meet, which greatly was summoned by the project about academia by the Catalan artist, Spanish artist, Mr. Muntadas. So, to begin this afternoon's work, a little ahead, I will give you the profile of each of the guests, and I will be speaking about our artist, Antoni Muntadas, and I'll hand over the floor to our director, Ari Plonsky, Director of Advanced Studies. Good afternoon to all who are present here and those who are following us online. I would particularly like to greet our artist, Antoni Muntadas, whom I guess has something in common with me. He's from the Industrial Engineering University of Industrial Engineering, and we here are production engineering academically. So we really praise your interdisciplinarity between technology, art, and so many languages. I would like to greet also very cordially Mr. Néstor Garcia, who is the title holder of the chair of Olavo Setúbal chairmanship, who has the capacity of, in the capacity of the first title holder in the acknowledgement in the whole of Latin America. And we have Professor Macaé Evaristo, who's witnessing this importance. I'd like to greet Professor Macaé Evaristo, who has been a person from the educational community, and call your attention that in this week, yesterday was the World Day of Education. So it's a great premonition that we have here for this event, which begins this week. And it's even more prominent that you are with us here representing the community of the activists in basic education. I would also like to thank the team of the Institute, the translator, and particularly Sergio Vassis, and my dear Sandra, the translators. I'd like to greet also, particularly, Professor Martin Grossman, who is a creator and an implementer. Well, he has implemented ideas into reality. Professor Martin is the next director of the Institute, but always the director, the exercising director, and he permanently coordinates the forum and the dialogue between public and private with headquartered in the Institute. And also I'd like to mention two libraries, the Library of Berlin and the Cultural Institute of São Paulo. It is important to open up this space and advance using, on behalf of the Institute, to bring first contemporary art, and second, an art that can have a dialogue with the essence of what we do in the Institute, since we are the Advanced Studies Institute of the University of São Paulo. There are institutes of advanced studies that are isolated, let's say, Pioneer Institute in Princeton, Princeton Institute. It's a brilliant but independent institute. There is a network of institutes around the world, of institutions that are connected to universities, and our institution is one of those, connected to University of São Paulo. And the motive of this connection between us and the Advanced Studies Institute focuses on the place where this institute locates itself, which is the academy. And the title, About Academia, is a very interesting one. And watching the presentation that Martin did, the exhibition that was held virtually, he used, just let me check if I can localize it here. He used an expression, which is, I saw it in Spanish, presentación. In the presentation, Martin puts forth the title, Where is the Academy? So if Antoni Muntadas allows me, I believe that his exhibition and this seminar that begins today and will continue on the 10th, or through to the 10th, is a continuous activity and on the exhibition of About Academia. But it brings the question, academia, whereabouts? What's the place occupied by the university and how it is perceived? Where is the university in the great challenges of humanity? Whether it's the present day challenge, which is the health challenge, but the challenge of the university in its wider sense, not only pandemics, but syndemics, which is a combination between biological and social nature aspects. So today we are beginning a talk that is motivated by art, which will focus on a wider view and an innovative view in this environment which we are, which is the university. So I thank again Antoni Muntadas, and I greet him for his capacity of translating what is contemporary into a visual format. I thank Nestor for having organized this cultural party, which we begin now. And I greet once more Professor Canclini, Macaé Evaristo, and I wish us all a great event for all of us. Thank you, Ari, for your introductory words. And with that, I will be speaking a bit more about the guests here. And beyond this partnership, which we have rounded up here, the Institute of Advanced Studies, the Braziliana Library of the University of São Paulo, and the Permanent Forum, which is a group, a research group, as Ari said, that has a headquarter in IEA, but also integrates post-graduation and research in the arts and communication schools of the University of São Paulo. Also, the forum has elaborated this relationship, has brought these partners with the idea of bringing forth a project that might discuss the university as we have been doing since some time ago. So the Institute of Advanced Studies has been putting ahead these exchange and debate environments, but also criticism since the end of the 90s, when the Institute began to organize these events, and also among groups with a more temporary groups to discuss modern university and university in Brazil specifically, and also specifically the public university. So because IEA assumed the objective I mentioned of the possibility of being an institutional critic, I think that beyond being a museum or an art gallery like Maria Antonia, the advanced research institutes might cover the university according to the characteristics which Muntadas brings forth. I think Muntadas, instead of calling it an exhibition, calls it a project, because it is a project which began in Harvard, in Cambridge, which is this city that has two of the most important universities of the Live League. This is a very special place in the United States, which hosts intellectual people, artists, in an environment that is very motivating, and produced this exhibition at the time when Tadas was finishing his long period as a long-time MIT teacher, which also depended on the advanced studies there. It is a group which he participated in with some names, but the first one was the Advanced Studies in Art Institute, very much caring about the pioneers of the last century, bringing people from Europe and the United States, involving teaching, education. So the importance of being in a platform with IAC, which is an interdisciplinary platform that thinks and motivates transdisciplinarity, makes it for this project about academia to have an appropriate place in the University of Sao Paulo, because it has very diverse characteristics. Before handing over the floor to Muntadas, I would also like, before anything else, to thank our participants. Ailton has arrived, so we had been waiting for him, so it's great that he's with us. What is important is that the permanent forum, which organizes with the support of, as Ali Prosky reminded us, in the Secretary of State in Culture and Creative Industries, it is precisely, the great thing is that it's the idea of the forum, since its beginnings, is, I have it in English, I say it's a doting.org. That is, floating.org. In other words, a platform that is floating, because it is in the interstice for connections of the art system. So Permanent Forum, from 2013 onwards, developed a number of strategies so that the art environment would be more open to other areas of knowledge and other practices. And with that, it was also very innovative in being one of the first research groups to use the webcast technology. In other words, online transmission, live transmission of the important debates that may be held in the sphere of contemporary art and art definitions and the relationships that exist between art and culture. once again with Muntadas, and I thank Muntadas very much for this, is that we were able to make a partnership
Em vez de desistirmos dessa
and
ideia,
make us to insist in the idea of bringing about academics to Brazil because of the pandemics. And we advanced, and we faced this challenge of translating or transporting your project to virtual reality. For the last couple of months, we've been working in very tight collaboration to make this idea of a virtual exhibition into a reality. With that, I want to thank all the team of the Permanent Forum, the IEA team, which made it possible and opened doors, and also showed to be very permeable to think of this transport in this process of coming out of the physical space and migrate to virtual means. What we did, I understand it to be not only an innovative process, Ari, but also linked to the role of art that art has in the galaxy of knowledge, which is the sphere of invention. So we did something that really was different in terms of spatial research. And I'm very curious to hear the reactions that our guests might talk about here in this project led by Muntadas. Apart from Antoni Muntadas, the artist, who has incredible trajectory, if we think of the contemporary artist who doesn't have a fixed studio, but has two different residences or studies, one in New York and one in Barcelona, but he's a planetary artist, an artist that is able to create networks wherever he is. So Muntadas has a knowledge of systems, education and art systems, and also, I would say, relationship between technology and media and the world itself, which is very interesting. It's unique, his knowledge. So here in Brazil, Muntadas has related since the beginning. He has related to the vanguard with groups that had, strong groups that had relationships with Walter Zaninho, the first Silveira and Júlio Plaza. And so he brought up several students, and he has been invited to come back to Brazil, not only to exhibit his works, but also to give courses, especially in post-graduation level. So along these years, Muntadas went on to get to know artists of several different kinds of tendencies, and also in the world, not only Brazil, but particularly in Latin America, where Muntadas frequently goes to Colombia, Cuba, Venezuela, Argentina, and other countries. I'm not mentioning all of them here, but that is very important and interesting for us in this afternoon, where we gather a very diverse group, but that also has relationships not only with the Western cosmology, Eurocentric cosmology, which also commands the relationships that happen inside universities, but also related to other cosmologies and other knowledges. So this discussion that Muntadas brought from the north of this Pan-American axis to be in contact with other reflections regarding not only the construction of new cadres in education, but also how knowledge is constituted. And in this path, what has been left aside, what has not been valued. And that's why I understand that his presence here, and also Macaé Evaristo's presence, who has been ahead of the Secretary of State of Education which has been also at the head of the Municipal Secretary of Education in Belo Horizonte, capital of the state of Minas Gerais. And so Ailton and Macaé are also going to play ball regarding the indigenous education, this revolution that is just ahead of us, facing us to have other experiences, other cosmologies inside the university. So Macaé, involved several educational institutions in teaching in the state and municipality. One of the icons of contemporary art in Brazil, which is the Inhotim Institute. So Macaé has much to tell us. I don't want to be too long here, but I make a bridge also to our very dear philosopher, thinker, medium person, who is ancestral and very present of the originary peoples who populated our land. One of the proprietors of this place called Brazil, who is Ailton Krenak. I had several opportunities to be with Ailton, and the last one, a live presence of Ailton, was with me. We were in the favela da Maré, a slum in in the north of Brazil. And Eliana has already mentioned this. Well, Eliana was vaccinated but had adverse effects, strong effects with the vaccine, and she can't be here with us today. She's in bed. But she will be here in spirit, another kind of presence. But it was Eliana who also brought OEA to the IEA. She brought the idea of seeing the periphery also as a potency. So this search, Ari also is listening to her. So the IEA is a Advanced Studies Institute as a proposal for a new path to study, and Macaé also as a Eliana also brought this experience from the Maré slum in the north of Brazil. So, Ailton here will also make a bridge between academy and something that is the big question, which is what kind of university do we want? It's in the our wishful box, but also reality. Something that we find not only in Brazil, but in the world, which is many of the things that are necessary, or a wish of ours, is to foster utopia. So to think together as to how this university, not only here and now, but can, in the future, lead us to a different world from the one we live today. I don't know if it will be a better world, but it might have some new significances. And the educational project in Brazil in the last 30 years has shown the potency and the capacity and the creativity that we Brazilians have in terms to think of other ways to educate. And Ari also has advanced studies in basic education, and this is in the thinking and projects of an Institute of Advanced Studies. And lastly, I would also like to refer to our present-day chairholder of the university. He's one of the representatives of Latin America here, Néstor. Néstor, you talk about the enormous territory and complex territory, which, if we look at knowledge as it was generated, and what we have in contact in terms of knowledge regarding culture and entertainment in Latin America, is you are one of the thinkers that has dared to understand who we are and where we are bound to. So I have a great expectation, and I would like to tell you again that it is an immense pleasure to have you in our company. Your presence as a whole. Here is difficult to describe, really. It is the ineffable. And I thank again Antoni Muntadas to give us this possibility of meeting here and to have the discussion we're having this afternoon. Antoni Muntadas, it's your floor. Thank you, Martin. And thank everybody for being here. All of us talking, discussing about concerns that are not common. I would say to Ari that I'm more of an artist than an engineer. And the production as an artist has taken me to where I am now. But I have to admit that the university has been important to organize the head, to organize and order the head. I always say that, albeit the practices of engineering are left aside, it has been, or it was, an interesting moment to analyze the logics of thinking. I would make a brief introduction, and I would like to begin by the end. I would like to begin by the thanks, which should also be at the end, aren't they? So I'd like to say that, like in a film, I thank very much Martin Grossman, because without him, it wouldn't be possible. It was because of his perseverance and his will. A project was developed, and when we were in the Brazilian library, defining the physical space of it, we saw that it was very much advanced. There was the pandemics, and we had to switch gears, and we saw that we had to make what was visible and make it into the network. There are many works that are forced by circumstances. It's happened to me in other projects, and sometimes we have to reinvent ourselves and our situations. So stimulated by Martin, the digital translation, I like to use the word translation because I believe that is a concept that unites the way to understand culture, and him together with Diego and Karkove and Andrea Nakash in Arthur and Marcela have been an exceptional team to develop the project that we can see digitally. Well, how did this begin? It started in Cambridge, as Martin mentioned. I was giving classes almost 14 years, and I was ready to leave at the 14th year. And then there was a goodbye event with Canclini, and who was like an accomplice that I really value, and whom I thank you for being here. The idea is that Harvard proposed in this situation to make a project. And I thought it would be a good moment. And after rethinking about the many years that I've spent in the university, in different experiences, to confront the situations of academy and the university. So that possibility of presenting the Carpenter Center, that was the origin of the Academy project, where there was Academy 1, in which several teachers, especially Martin Harvard, were one of the first that I interviewed. The first ones that I interviewed. And I take it from social practices that I've undergone. Field work is something that has always nourished my way of doing things, because I believe these are dialogues, but really the interviews is to ask someone to give you the information that he or she has. But that's not the way to face interviews. It's like publicity. An interview is something elementary from the point of view of understanding and receiving information. So these interviews with people who were in MIT extended itself to other universities because other problematics appeared to join urbanist architects and looking at the university and looking at the university, at the civilization and looking at the university at the same time. I understood that there was I understood that it should be an experience that last several years. There were some obstacles, of course, but as any project. But this is one of the very few people in which we've coincided with Martin, or that we agree on. I don't want to think too much about it, but I believe that this project is a United States project with an American university. And when it is presented outside of the borders of the US, it is difficult to present it in, it's important to present it in roundtables and understand that it is not a colonizing project. The project is a critical reflection about the North American universities. There are positive things, but there are very problematic things also. I'll say the questions that I made in this project, and I want to emphasize this, that in these roundtables we had, they might give place to other projects and other models for universities, especially in Latin America, because this project is made for Latin America. Brazil is in Latin America. So these projects and these contexts reflect and have the interest in give digital interpretation to academy. I'll come back to the idea that what originated us. Well, I had the opportunity of interviewing people that are known by you, but I thank all these interviewed people. There were sometimes longer, hour-long interviews. And when the Harvard project was made, after some time, I started thinking there's something missing here. I have to complete this project. And that's how academia too popped up. I want to hear the voices of the students, I said. I was for like a year and a half interviewing some of my ex-students, but also students from other universities. And that was made in Baltimore. And both of them were presented Academia 1 and Academia 2 in the advanced studies place there. I say that the voice of the students began to be more critical than the teachers' voices. Very interesting from the points of view of experience, because they started to reveal situations of what the university represents, the American universities, their racism, discrimination issues, hierarchies, ratings. What is Ivy League university and a public university or private university? All these questions and these issues were able to be revealed thanks to the conversations with teachers. And it's down here in these transcription little leaflets that I share as part of the project. And that makes, let's say, a slower reading of what happened, and so that you can follow it. In this situation, I would say that I can't say much more about this. Much of the situation is that I propose to stick to the project, and I see it as an artifact that can be activated. Many of my projects, they are not activated. They don't make any sense. So apart from that, I would like to have a continuation of questions and answers in a chain that, if not applicable, does not work. So I was 10 years working on projects, the project called Between the Frames from 82 to 93. So it had in view people who belong to the system. So About Academia is a second phase of analyzing systems of culture or cultural systems and see how we are and how we use, know, and can be able to receive these cultural systems. To finish here, I'd like to read you the list of questions. It's a list of words. It says, academia versus university, private versus public, acknowledgement versus titling or employment, institution versus corporation. The 60s and the 70s, I consider that these are important times to reevaluate this situation. There should be a question here as to the last century, the 90s. Critical thinking and power, alternatives and utopia, research versus interdisciplinarity, gender or race, work or stress, economy, rankings, space, architecture, urbanism, centrifugation, and lastly, globalization. From these 15 issues, the project was developed, and you have access. There was some cutting there, speech. Well, in this case, we have the pandemic. And Martin, I hand the floor over to you, and thank you very much.
Obrigado mais uma vez, Muntadas, por essa contextualização, né? Muito importante. Ao enumerar as perguntas que fizeram parte desse guion, né? Desse roteiro seu nas entrevistas com professores, intelectuais, pesquisadores para a Academia 1, About Academia 1 e também os estudantes em About Academia 2, deixar muito claro, Muntadas, não há aqui uma diferença. O que eu vejo é que a sua posição, uma vez que você conhece diferentes realidades no globo, que você conseguiu reunir não só esse conjunto de perguntas, mas você colocou a universidade em xeque. E essa universidade em xeque, ela, obviamente, ela não é um assunto só exclusivo de universidades como essa, né, que você teve essa relação estreita sendo professor do MIT, mas ela tem muito a ver com a nossa situação aqui. Só que, obviamente, uma vez ao organizarmos, né, e você me deu essa liberdade de pensar essa estrutura dialógica, que é esse evento aqui, né, esse debate, pensarmos e trazermos para essa arena, né, para esse momento de debate, representantes de novos rumos, eu diria até, para o ensino no Brasil, né? E claro, considerando
This could be used for new paths for Brazil.
Uma vez que ele é pensador desse continente maior que é esse eixo pan-americano, né? Pensarmos essa comunicação, esse fluxo entre essas diferentes partes dessa parte desse globo, né? Então, assim, eu entendo que sim, elas são perguntas e é um site específico, né? É um sítio específico, é um lugar específico, esse lugar onde você produziu a sua exposição, mas você teve essa habilidade, Muntadas, de fazer com que ela pudesse se adaptar a essas nossas outras situações, né? Então, é a primeira vez que a exposição vem para o globo, para o sul global, então não só para o hemisfério sul, né, mas para uma situação muito diferente.
This is the first time that this has come to the Southern Hemisphere, but a very different situation, like the University of São Paulo sometimes becomes like it was part of an Ivy League when, in fact, it is a global university, but it also is a university which is the paradigm for Brazil, where it relates very much within its own context, and it has had this relationship that was very direct with public policies and related to the building of a very young country. And Ailton may talk about that about its traditions, the University of Paulo's traditions. I believe that this criticism of ours today, with Ailton Macaé, Néstor, and also Sousa Silva, will probably present very important views on this project that will certainly continue to travel around the globe to motivate situations such as this, ones we're undergoing now. I'll hand over the floor to Néstor, and I don't know if Ailton is in agreement with this order of things, but Ailton, very much welcome to this afternoon of our discussion. And we also thought that perhaps you could be the last one to talk. We hand over the floor now to Néstor and then to Macaé, and then you can enter the rooms. Okay, thank you. I believe I'm okay. So, Néstor, thank you very much. I will be speaking in Spanish. I do understand Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese too. So it is an enormous pleasure for me here.
Sobre distintos trabajos de él, y en esta ocasión creo que podríamos comenzar también señalando el contexto que da esta invitación en el marco del periodo de este año tan singular o estos
I think this should be discussed within this very peculiar moment we are going through, which is practically an interruption with some tones and complexities and not a disappearing of things. Right? To be in this year working in the chair of Setúbal in USP has been an enormous stimulation. We all know of the difficulties so many incertitudes in life nowadays, and to have such a stimulating work as the research that we're doing today about the new forms of institutionality that are being taken forth in culture in Brazil, and to search for some comparison as to what is happening with the emergency policies in culture in Argentina and Mexico is an extraordinary stimulation that gives us a lot of enthusiasm and expectations of what we might come to know and really think in other institutions about universities. Therefore, this Muntadas project, of which I knew the previous edition in English, stimulates me to see this project in this year as I work with the Academy. I should postulate a question: how to read Academy in this time of interruption when there are no classes in face-to-face rooms and curricula. University is closed, and what was given in buildings is now transmitted by the house of people. The interviews, the spaces, and the architecture, and what is done in these spaces, in the architecture of the universities, were important as part of the discussion. And the fact that these buildings are closed, or that we are stimulated to think again as to what we can do with a university and what the university might become in the future. I want to point out, in the first place, that it is an artist who is formulating these questions in the interviews. An artist that is very well informed about the universities in the world, and especially the United States ones, and that has made design institutions, and that is in the catalogs of these institutions. In this article of his, in this production of his about academy, you have no questions, you have no answers, but questions. We can see schematically that science and technology give answers to questions of society, how to solve this, how to create this machine, how to intervene in the social process, how to get to know. Well, art works with questions that have no answers, really. Questions where the interest is precisely in its incertitude. The work of academy is generated by an artist, Muntadas, who has very punctual questions, sometimes challenging questions, and that's not very common. It is not common that someone, even though she has lived for decades in the United States, and who's a foreigner there, dares to make punctual, bothering questions, uncomfortable questions for first-level academic teachers, such as he did in Academia 1. So this artist that asks should be placed in a very high place. In any case, I pick up the initial question. What's the meaning of interrogating ourselves about institutions with buildings where, well, we are going from institutions to contingencies? We are in a generalized incertitude and uncertainty. And in 2010, in an interview with Carol Baker, he says, I've been dreaming of putting up an art school with a group of people without any facilities, built-up facilities. We hear this, it sounds utopically interesting, but now we have no possibility of using these facilities. So how do you teach chemistry? How do you work in a lab without being in the same building, the same space for experimentation? With the tools that we must use in a lab. So now I ask, why have facilities without a city? How to have buildings without a city? In the exhibition, there are some answers. Why having buildings in certain zones of the city? There are universities who have thought of making investments in several universities. For example, University of Columbia, NYU, have many buildings around where students live and with which they gather funds that are really investment to finance the university, right? Or maybe it is to render service to the universities, where the universities render education to those who are not inscribed, who have not inscribed or enrolled students who now have jobs at the university, or maybe also the university situated in a part of the city to bring students of that zone specifically. I know I belong to a university, a metropolitan university of Mexico, in one of the more marginal zones of city, equivalent, say, at ABC of São Paulo, where there is the great centrality, the central of distribution of food in the cities, where 330,000 people work every day, where there is a lot of informal jobs and in very precarious living conditions. And there you have to work with the university. And the university gives away jobs to the population. What services? Well, for example, several universities in Latin America are attached to the mayor to know what solutions can be given to the Palapa. Palapa is the name of the peripheral region of Mexico City, or to solve problems of security problems and make sidewalks that may help students to get to the subway or street lights, and the inhabitants of Mexico City can walk without being robbed, without women being raped also, right? So I ask Muntadas, Carol Becker asks Muntadas, how can culture produce itself both inside and outside the university? And here is the experience that university is not only a field, a campus, as happens in several United States universities, but more and more Latin American universities also are beginning to get their campi, but it could also link itself better with what is its surroundings.
Carol Becker le contesta a otra pregunta de Muntadas si no está habiendo una transición de la universidad como institución a la universidad como empresa, formadora de élites empresariales y gubernamentales asociadas a las empresas en Estados Unidos y en los muchos otros países que mandan estudiantes o cuyos estudiantes quieren formarse en Columbia, en Stanford, etc. Y es curiosa la respuesta de Carol Becker, porque dice, no puedo imaginar a la universidad como una marca única a la que la gente acude, en la que invierte y de la cual sale un producto. No puedo verla como una empresa porque su producto es muy efímero. Me hizo gracia cuando lo leí en esta época en que los productos son tan efímeros. Hace mucho que la industrialización se dedicó justamente a que los coches no duren 25 años como duraban en los años 60. ¿Quién se acuerda hoy de que hace muy poco tiempo, poco más de una década, usábamos intensivamente el Facebook, un conjunto de instrumentos y dispositivos digitales, no el Facebook, sino ya ni me acuerdo el nombre, esto que uno metía las hojas y salían en otro lugar. Esta obsolescencia alcanza también a la universidad. Voy a ir puntualizando.
This obsolescence reaches university. I will be finishing in some of the aspects that we found in the interviews and in the exhibition that is now being shown by Muntadas.
Hay una diferencia en cuanto a los actores que hablan entre el Abajo de Academia 1 y el 2, hecho en 2017, porque en 2017 aparece...
In 2017, there were the challenges of students' activism. That was one of the themes that never showed before. In 2016, it was said, Occupy Our Stream different in the streets and the digital world. I'm talking about Karl Mohn's and Shah interventions. And here we have to talk about the importance that universities have had as places for generation of social urban interventions in the cities in Argentina and Chile, Peru, Mexico, Colombia, in several of countries of Latin America, which even through the pandemics could come out of campus and be present on the streets to make performing actions that makes it very near to get the knowledge by students at universities and the artists. All this has much relation with other themes that all show up in several of the questions and conversations. In general, as those who are developed more extensively by John Cosworth, when he talks about university as closed urbanization. We can ask ourselves, or is it de-urbanization? And I remember my own experience when I arrived to Homage about some time ago at the University of Columbia. It was homage paid to Martin Franco, a great teacher, Spanish teacher who taught in Columbia. And in the hotel, they told me that a young teacher is going to pick you up at the hotel because it is a 14-floor building and its entries are controlled, electronically controlled. Otherwise, you won't be able to get there, to get in. So there were these like cards to get into the subway and so on. And the university had this kind of trenches to protect it. Say. So there are several universities in the United States which isolate themselves or have been isolated when they were made into a campus, and sometimes a campus that has no city, perhaps a few streets that are to be trod on by people who don't really go out. They live there. And the university teachers in general in the United States, they do not write in the big newspapers and the great press and are not invited by TV programs to be interviewed. I would like to mention a big difference. In Latin America, there is a social insertion, a historical insertion of research teachers, which, well, we can write occasionally, some weekly, like they do in Folha de São Paulo and other newspapers in Brazil, in the Argentina, Página 12, and other newspapers in Mexico also. There is this very visible presence, at least for those who still read newspapers in print, on paper. But this public presence of the teachers has changed with video policies. There has been a reduction on the role of intellectual people in general, and also, especially, university people. And this is a reason for reflecting upon this. Not to say that we are different in Latin America, but also to say that we are in a new sphere, a new communicational orbit that leads us to rethink the role of the university and of communication. And another point that I would like to mention, there are several that I wanted to point out to, but I think it is key to say that the relationship between universities, Latin American universities, and American universities with society is very weak and restricted. If we think that the scope, what happens in society is a global scope, They don't care about what happens with the what's happening in the university or what happens in other parts of the city or the country, but what happens in the world precisely. So globalization is not simply a motto. It's something that's been happening for at least 3 decades and very intensively. And so I make myself the question, a question that is can be compared to another one. How many research centers in Latin America exist in the United States? And how many about the United States exist in Latin America? We know very little in Latin America. We know very little about those we depend upon. And they much, even less than what we know about them. So this non-symmetric situation has gone through colonialism and imperialism intact, whether it be the and we've come to a globalized, unequal mutual dependence. And the question also is how many teaching and research centers about Latin America exist in China? In 2009, I had the opportunity of giving a conference in the University of Nottingham in Ningbo, 4.5 million inhabitant city near Shanghai in China, in the other extreme of the Great Bay there. So I wasn't accustomed to thinking of this relationship. Nottingham University in Ningbo, in China. And who owned this university? Well, it's an agreement, they said, between Nottingham University and the owner of the university, who was a Chinese entrepreneur. And there were other factors also, a very complex agreement, yes. But then there were an evidence that in other places, which I checked in this, there was a Stanford in China too, right? So this East Asian scope, and I've known this because I've also worked with other Asians, Koreans, for example, in Asia. But this scope is also the scope of the Latin Americans. China is in several markets, is the second investing agent in the United States, and is putting up research centers about Latin America in China. And some of them are called Confucius in Brazil, like in Brazil, are in our territory. So I'd like to point out to this sort of extension of the geographic limitations, as the project of Muntadas puts forth, this opening that we can see in Academy 2016. Because there you have Chinese men and women who teach or who study in the United States, right? So I would stop here. There would be a lot more to say, but yes, but I'm just going to point out to one little issue more. I believe that there is something key at the time when this exhibit is being held in Sao Paulo, which is to see as a reference not only the territory, which is so important for the universities, their facilities, their campi, but also the online situation. What is the meaning of this? So we're going from a university that is situated in a certain place of the urban area into a university that has no roof and is irradiating into the world through conferences with the online classes that are distributed among many countries. Students who gave up living in around the University of Miami and very much unwilling to do so, and went back to their countries, their villages in other places, in other countries, and don't want to pay the rent there in Miami and stay there. a new geography, a new geopolitics of the instruction given out at the university. So I stop here so that we can continue. Thank you. Nestor, thank you very much for this initial contribution. Of course, after Muntadas' talk and using one of the most important books of his, this hybrid cultures, Latin America or American environments, you know. Now I hand over the floor to Macaé Evaristo, whom I briefly introduced. And we are all quite enthusiastic about how you see the relationship between art and university, and also with her efforts, a historic effort, in fact, for relating teaching with culture. Also, for a way of discussing these things here, she says, I am genetically happy, says Macaé. So in this meeting, we see that we are uniting optimists regarding the present-day situation, and also those who help utopia to become concrete aspects. Good afternoon, all of you. I want to thank, on behalf of Martin, the opportunity, his invitation to IEA in this meeting. I would like to say that I'm very happy to be able to share with such special people, so inspiring people. On this debate on university, the university we want, and about art and university, I think it is important for me to introduce myself a little, because I have been invited to talk about the university, but I'm not a university teacher. I'm a teacher, basic education, who has dedicated most of her life for fundamental school teaching, and afterwards to work with the training of teachers, and to think of policies, and to develop public policies and use public policies, especially with a focus in the reduction of inequalities. So a great part of my path, professional path, happens in public schools of the periphery of Belo Horizonte, capital of the state of Minas Gerais, working in poor communities, or who had very low rates of human development, very below poverty line. And coming out of the military dictatorship in Brazil, I started to work here in 1984. And with my path, within my path, I had a lot of anxieties. First, the fact that many youngsters do not have access to education, many. And also to support putting into our public schools the understanding as to how we, men and women, Afro-descendant women, and members of the periphery, to understand how we didn't fit. This school that was established gave very little space for us to be ourselves. And the whole of the perspective was an exclusion policy and an erasing of our traditions, our personalities, the places where we were inserted into. So my path is full of that spirit of looking at the institution, acknowledging the importance of these institutions. I'm coming from a family that puts education in a very honorable place, an emancipation place. My mother raised 4 children alone. And you have to study, she told us. Education is the only path you have to get into anywhere by the front door, especially in Brazil, an extremely racist country, extremely macho and excluding country. But at the same time, as we are in this school, we see that the mechanisms that are built exclusively for our exclusion. So my path was an attempt to counterbalance an institutional bureaucracy that is instituted precisely to put us at the margins, giving no possibility for us to talk about ourselves. So I've worked in periphery schools, and from our work in these periphery schools, I started to meet other challenges. For example, working with the training of indigenous teachers in Minas Gerais. So when I was working for this program for training indigenous teachers, another universe was brought up upon me. And to understand what is the meaning of a school that carries this concept with it, to keep a memory, a colonizing memory that has never been thought of and that was thought about and that was imposed on indigenous populations. But I will work with other resources of groups, several groups, that at the same time want the school, but do not want the school, the one that exists presently, the school. And that will have to go through that in a permanent tension. I could also talk to you about this passage through indigenous education, but I'll be fast about this. Because from indigenous education, I will go back to the public network of schools in Belo Horizonte as a manager now, as an administrator. They called me as a manager to take care of this diversity in ways of thinking, different structures, and how to subvert. And I will go back to the public network, and then I have to face the need of thinking about the policies and how to articulate with the little I had learned with the indigenous peoples. How do we articulate the struggle for land, the struggle for life with better life conditions, the struggle for cultural production with this school universe? That's what I wanted to tell you. We developed in Belo Horizonte a program for integral education. It's called integrated school, that came from the point of view that we would make a school not only for inside the school. So we started thinking of an agenda for education that would be integral, that could be articulate different institutions in the city. Within these institutions, of course, the universities, right? But we articulated 3, in the case of Belo Horizonte city, we have articulated 3 higher education institutions of the city. We articulate ourselves with all the network of museums of the city, including Inhotim Institute. And we made a mapping of the city, of all the squares, of all the parks, all the community associations, community libraries. In fact, all the spaces that were around the school, to think of a formula that could make it possible to have a dialogue between the school and its surroundings, but also the mapping of the cultural production that there was there. Who were the artists? There were the photographers, the hip-hop singers and rap singers. Who were the capoeira, special traditional dance in Brazil? And we began to make a project of a policy that had a wide scope, because we had 45,000 students, with a posture that was almost arts and crafts, because each region of the city, each territory, had very their own characteristics, and the cultural production happened there. So at the same time as it was possible, we would connect to other regions of the city, because we also thought about not putting these people into cells, their own territories, but we thought of potentializing this agenda towards the territories, and this would become an exchange and make a meeting. That's how many public school children met the whole of the cultural artistic production that happens in Inhotim Museum. And not only with the cultural production, but also the cultural production that is done in the Pataxó village, an indigenous village, which is 100 kilometers from the capital. They found this cultural production of quilombola communities around the cities and inside the cities. Communities that live here, just to see that these communities are only urban, but the school captured these other territories. Many times we think of the university that we want, but I will always think of that university from the demands of popular movements. I also had work in the Ministry of Education. I was in the continuous education secretary of the Ministry of Education, and in that space, I was able to participate in some debates, and then I take again this my formation in basic education. One aspect was to work in ensuring the intercultural indigenous education, which was a second step. When I started working in the training of indigenous teachers, I started working in the education or training of mid-education teachers. So in most of the teachers who worked in the mid-education network of Belo Horizonte were white people. They were called white teachers. And one day I told people, hey, don't you see me? Look at me. Come on, are you going to tell this to a big nigger woman that she's a white teacher? That was the name I had, right? White teachers. So I've worked in different aspects of Minas Gerais education system, and also in organizations of teachers, of indigenous teachers also. When we talked about the intercultural indigenous education associations, we had many indigenous teachers already at that time. And in the context of my presence in the ministry, we could advance a lot. So nowadays we have intercultural pedagogical courses, but we came into a debate, which is the debate about the indigenous universities in Brazil. So let's talk about an indigenous university in Brazil. But the fundamental prison, when we go into this debate, is very much linked to the structures. How do you put in the structure of a university? Because the university structure is still very much waterproof, airtight, not only about their own logics, but also the traditional knowledge. It's very difficult to discuss about universities, about the entry and participation, for example, of indigenous, not as students, but as teachers and as masters and doctors, as they are in, how do they get back into their peoples if they haven't gone through the process of a university formation? nowadays you have logics of the university that you don't get a degree as master's doctors if you don't go through all the steps, which exclude indigenous populations and Black population from access. So we were like forbidden to study, forbidden to have access, not in university, but basic education too. How can we acknowledge this university, of which we absolutely do not participate from the point of view of its conception as university? I remind myself here about the book by James Baldwin, where he writes about the native son, was it called? I can't remember the name of his essay, where he says that when he goes to Paris to live there, he looks at all the buildings around him and he cannot recognize himself. He cannot see himself there. He says, nothing, this talks about me, my history, my memory, nothing. So I believe that many times we get into university and get to school and we look around the structure and we do not see ourselves. We do not find ourselves there. We do not find ourselves in that architecture. We do not find ourselves in the forms of relationship. Knowledges that we have, of central knowledges that we have, sometimes do not fit these places. And then I was thinking, well, Ari was talking, when he talked about the first book of his that I read, which made a big track in me, different, unequal, and disconnected. Different, unequal, and disconnected. Different, unequal, and disconnected. And then this made a big impression on me, because when we look at Brazil, we reaffirm ourselves as a political and social movement. We reaffirm our difference. We don't want to say that we're equal, no. I'm a Black woman. I'm not an indigenous person only. I don't belong to the Krenak indigenous people. We want to affirm these differences. Now, we don't want this difference to be the foundations to make us unequal in the sense that we do not have any guarantees to live from the point of view of our rights. Rights to be alive, right to be in this world. And many times the choices that are made, when they say disconnected, I believe, disconnected from what? Or who disconnected us? Who's the author of this disconnection? So I have to think about those words, because when Muntadas talks about words, I make education a struggle to defense of public school. He says several words in his list. I put myself in a position in every pair of words that he said. Public and private. Yeah, I am from a public school, yes. But what is public in our country? Many times what's public in our school is mistaken by state-owned. What is financed by state, but it's not public in the sense that the different subjects of this public can appropriate ourselves of the space. So when we think of what university we want, well, we want university, yes, the university, yes, but not the one that looks at us and disconnects us, right? We want the university, yes, but we want to make the university to be a university that also respects us. A university that respects us as collective beings, respects us in our way of intellectual production, our way of understanding the relationship and executing relations, economic, social relations, that may give us opportunities in a living together. And we talked about the democratic living together, right? thinking of democracy. And then I hear Ailton talks about floristry instead of democracy, saying that this democracy that is there, the formal democracy, absolutely does not represent us, absolutely, because its way of representing the world that more and more puts us outside this world, excludes us. So I would like to bring this contribution here, that I'm always thinking as to how we can reinvent these places. I want to be in the university, yes. I always say this as the basic education. We can't invent another word. And we have a curriculum, you know, there's so many things that were put, it's really put on, you know, these words that they put in. For example, I don't have place to art in the Brazilian school curriculum. There's no place for philosophy. There's no place for women. We can't discuss gender if we depend on the logics of the economy and of the ultra-liberality that is now given by the Brazilian government, as an attempt also by establishing a theocracy. There's no place for that. So our place is the place of subversion. What kind of university do we want? We want to subvert this university that is existing there. First, with our bodies, to be there, to be present there, with our bodies. This already is a revolution. When we approved the law of quotas for Afro-descendants. No? Well, finally, the left wing would discover the Brazilian university, because these people, you know, the students of public schools, the blacks, the niggers, the indigenous, we're going to put them into university so that University of Brazil would lose its quality. That's a debate that goes on, you know. The Brazilian university would lose its quality if the niggers would put in there. Well, the Minister of Treasury said that it's absurd that the Lula government financed the studies for the son of his housekeeper and domestic workers and the periphery people. He financed university studies for these people. And they say that this cannot be a university if these people came in. So what do you want to universalize with a university? Do you universalize a single form of thinking about all the rest of the world? It's not what we want, sorry. The university we want is a university that is really able to live together with our bodies, with our history, with our memory, and with our way to think about this world, to think about the relationships among people. And this is aligned to an idea of thinking about justice, economic justice, environmental justice. I think that might be one of the most important issues. I'm not a specialist in this, and there are people who might be saying better things about that. But I thank you very much for hearing me.
Somos nós que agradecemos a sua fala e que ela foi ganhando.
We are going to thank you for your speech, and you made it clear to us that we have so many people that have no place, and Brazil is starting to create space, and this is the result of struggles. And by telling us about your life story, we can see that we've been having to force this. The government doesn't have this among its objectives. And once again, I would like to mention Eliana Sousa Silva, who isn't able to be with us this afternoon. But we have the idea that 70% of Brazilians who are not in the university have power, and we are not familiar with this power. And through your speech, it's extremely clear that there's an endless number of knowledge, practices, experiences of which we are a part. And maybe the university would be this place. You know, still thinking about utopia, maybe the university would be an interface amongst all those practices. We could have in the university research that is really universal. University should think of what type of country we live in. And now it would be fantastic to listen to Ailton and then have room to Q&A. We are receiving many questions. And after Ailton's speech, we're going to have a Q&A session. And Ailton, thank you for being here with us. We watched you on Roda Viva, and it was amazing. From my point of view, which is Western, I see you as an artist. And it is really challenging to join intellectuals of the sort of the intellectuals that we have today in an event. And Macaé was talking about this relationship that is not only related with the body. And during your interview in Roda Viva, throughout 2 hours, it was as if it were a performance. You are a performer. And once again, I think it is important to be present somehow, although it's virtually. So I'll hand over the floor to you right now. Thank you very much, Martin, for the opportunity of being here. And I'm here amongst elderly people, and I am very proud of being here. My dearest Macaé brings so much enthusiasm. She's got this happiness DNA, which is burning. I listened to Nestor's speech about this project and the fact that the project questions academia. And I would like to discuss about the power of art. Art is able to change the world that we share, the world in which all of us live in. Art has this gift of touching those hard aspects, things that remain for a long time, sleeping, things that are like black rocks. And art does this type of movement. I was very proud when Néstor Muntadas described the project. It is an assertive project because it puts the university in a comfortable place. University has to be addressed universally, but the project also was created in the US. So from within the USA, the university has a specific meaning. The American society is fantastic. the American society model is incredible because it was organized to take over the planet, and it has taken over the planet. And it operates in a very specific way. But since we are talking about the Americas as a whole, I would like to consider the point of view of the project that is from the US and questioning US universities. It's as if we would turn a page. When we turn the page and stop looking at the USA and look to the rest of the Americas, we see a totally different world. A world in which university is seen as something weird, something that is distant, something that is so hard, that is not part of the universe, of the society in which it is in. So while I was listening to the speeches of the lecturers, I thought of a story. 10 years ago, an airplane crashed in the Amazon forest. The Army and the Marine tried to find the aircrafts, and they didn't find. A group of hunters from the Kayapo indigenous group took the task of locating the aircraft, and they had to recover the black box of the airplane. And I thought of an image. Can you imagine a group of hunters, collectors? They saw when the aircraft crashed in the forest, and nobody could find it. The Kayapo did find the aircraft's black box. Now, let's think about the way in which universities were established in the Americas. They were configured as black boxes. In the universities, we had the gathering of an entire development and of a specific logic, rationality, and method of measuring the world and of reproducing the world. If we think of the universities in the American continent as an non-identifiable object, we are not exaggerating. If we consider that in Latin America, leaving the US aside, if we think that universities throughout the entire 20th century, it only could be accessed by landowner children and what it was called as elite, and I don't know why it's called elite. So those were the only people who would become doctors and lawyers. And doctors and lawyers in Latin American is a synonym of something proprietary. So these gentlemen reproduced the colonial society that was introduced in Latin America in such a natural way that nobody questions that they are actually perpetrating colonialism in a disguised way. The 20th century gave a specific configuration to the academic world. And it is exactly the reproduction of political structures of alienation. And moreover, it does not question or interrupt anything. It continues. It's interesting if we think of Brazil. Fernando Henrique Cardoso was considering during the 70s or 80s, and as a prince, he was called the prince of sociology professionals. And what did he do while he was a president? He replicated the old hierarchical standard and the reproduction of a system that is never opened to others. This is what happened throughout the 80s. And then we had a social movement that ended up in the creation of a constitution that did not open up space for people who didn't belong to the landlords. Macaé was right when she said indigenous people or African Brazilians until the 80s or 90s, they didn't have access to universities. Only a few people had access. Milton Santos, Abdias do Nascimento. We have very, very few examples. So if in a country as big as Brazil, if we have having so little people being able to join the academia and become a doctor. This is not something we should be proud of. The black box of the universities are still to be found somewhere remotely. And when universities reproduce inequality, they are simply reproducing it. And in reality, the feeling shared by millions of people throughout Latin America is a wish for our universities to commit with life, with original people of the places in which they are established, so that they encourage metamorphosis until there are no walls, until the walls become impermeable, until they become just like the art from Oiticica, something that goes back to the life of ordinary people. Universities should not be something through which people pass, and when they come out, they are like a rainbow. They are proud, stubborn. They are no longer able to embrace their equals. People who join universities pay a very high price, especially people who come from ordinary origins, because these people, they have to convert to values and to protocols that turn these people into strangers when they come back to their origins. It's very common in our tribes when young people join the university. Everybody thinks that they're not going to go back home. So this question is very important, and it tells us a lot about what the people in Latin America think about academia. If I think that people from other parts of the world see it as a black box. I don't know what universities are going to be like after we overcome the challenges that we are facing nowadays. The objective would be to overcome the walls of knowledge and mix ourselves with other knowledges, other cultures, other possible worlds. When Macaé was describing her path, I could feel how painful it is having to tear the walls of universities with your bare hands. And those walls, they should be torn down by our relationships and our affection. And art has this power. I really liked the debate that this project brought about. Universities were taught by corporations, and this is an important aspect. Once I was in a conference about religion, sciences, and nature. I was invited by a Canadian university. A colleague invited me to give a lecture in a conference like this. It was a really great experience for me. There were people from many different continents. So it was a conference about religion, nature, and science. And what I said was that I found really interesting that science had been taught by corporations by the end of the 20th century. And that research within universities, especially in the USA, but also throughout the whole of Latin America, were directed. They were kind of tailored. Companies would request studies and universities would produce it. Our laboratories are built, equipped, and maintained by companies in Brazil. And during the 80s, it was really something seen as positive. You know, it as if we would have a fox overseeing hens. This is not possible. So in that conference that I was invited to give a lecture, I talked about this. And after my speech, I felt people started feeling uncomfortable with my presence because I said that I felt that scientists no longer existed. Scientists from the romantic point of view that a scientist is someone who is working on projects without having to think of the results demanded by companies, pharmaceutical companies, or automobile companies. Most of the time, scientists are thinking of how to build electric cars or to put satellites in Mars. Maybe it's something impolite, but if we think of the university of the 20th century that hasn't changed, university currently will have to be faced by young people who will choose not to go and attend those places. young people are going to choose to stay in their original areas, and virtual meetings or virtual studies and researches are going to be possible. And these people are going to question the hard walls of universities, the black box of universities. We have changes in technologies, and technology is making many of last century's habits obsolete. So universities will have to change from within, because otherwise they will become obsolete. They will turn into places to visit, you know, like historic monuments that we have throughout the globe. Maybe they will keep having social uses, but they will no longer have the place of building knowledge, because corporations had already taken over. Because companies are controlling the world, corporations. I was very surprised when I saw that most of the projects conducted by NASA are done by something that we call here in Brazil as PPP, public-private policy. This is when billionaire entrepreneurs buy projects. So those who are traveling in the space nowadays aren't universities, are private corporations. So the question that remains is, where is science? Is it still within universities, or has it migrated to the offices of executives or boards or managers? Here in Brazil, we have seen an assault in research. When we talk about agriculture and cattle breeding, these fields were caught by companies. Agribusiness has taken over. They are working to produce and reproduce equipment, for example. They're not focused on quality of life or in improving relationships between the communities that we have in Brazil, or improving the conditions of people who live in difficult situations. So this incredible institution that is present everywhere in the US, in Brazil, in Africa. We have land. Land is land in a broad point of view, poetic point of view. Universities and society, they simply started ignoring land. And among private universities, what we see is an attempt to get funds, no matter how. So universities could be powerful and could help. And we have to support social movements and communities. We have to question this structures that we have installed, be the structures of governments or companies. So we have to be able to question both public universities, which Macaé has already revealed us that have nothing that is related with public, because public and private universities are conducting the same types of research. They're not focused on social interests. I haven't got much more to say, and I'm going to keep on listening, and gratitude. Thank you very much. Ailton, thank you so much for being with us today in this environment. While you were talking, I started thinking about a few things, but I'm not going to start now, because I think that we probably have questions to one another. We have some minutes until we wrap up the event, which is going to be closed at 5 p.m. There are some questions from the audience, and after Néstor and Macaé and you, I'm going to open to this first nucleus to ask questions to one another, and then we open to the greater audience. Muntadas facing technological problems.
Okay. Entonces voy a hacer una intervención.
Great. I would like to make a testimonial before technology ruins again. I am using my smartphone because I don't know what's going on with my computer. So the speeches of the lecturers were extremely interesting, because it's important to listen to other people's opinions, and some of you brought up a word that is extremely important to me: access to the university. Who attends universities, and who is able to? This is something very important to think about. When I started the project, taking into consideration what goes on in the US, it was clear to me that what happens in public universities of Sevilla or Rome, which are kind of closer to Latin America than American universities. So everything has to do with how the economy affects university. So this relationship, institution versus corporation, is something extremely dialectical. Universities are becoming corporations. They follow market laws. We cannot be naive. We have to think that what universities do, especially American universities, they invert education. They turn university campuses into real estate and projects. Columbia University is absorbing Harlan. Harvard had to move to the other side of the river. So the universities are being transformed into real estate land. And we should think about education, really. Context is important because if we didn't have discussions like the one we are having today, this project would make no sense. You know, what we saw in Sevilla was totally different from what we saw in Amsterdam. So context is for utmost important. So Martin, I'll hand over the floor to you because maybe I'm going to disappear again due to technology. So the floor is open. If you have any comments or questions. Nestor? You have to unmute your mic, please.
Ahora sí, ¿no?
Oh, now it's working. Great.
Siento clave lo que acaban de exponer Macaé.
In my opinion, what Ailton and Macaé talked about is central, fundamental, and it brought back to my mind different experiences and projects that we performed in private and public universities in Mexico. There are research about digital networks as places of articulation of citizenship, and we have a very dynamic group in Mexico that conducts research and they study about what's going on with us, with humankind. And the huge development of indigenous and intercultural universities that we had in South America was something that we have to mention. Indigenous universities, for example, what they want is to have their specific university. They want to be part of national discussions. In Argentina, where we have 39 original peoples, there was a census, population census. We are going to have a census in 2022. And the census is going to be reformulated so that indigenous group can include their own questions about how they perceive themselves. Because it's not possible to have precise information, accurate information about people only by having the number of inhabitants. And this was developed thanks to indigenous movements up north and down south Argentina. So the white brought from Europe society that Argentina has is being demanded to include indigenous people. And indigenous people were denied. Even in Mexico, there are African peoples that are ignored. There's carnival in Mexico. And the music is called salsa, which is a very bad definition. So we can see that
ha sido también el aporte de antropólogos que han girado
Some
el eje de
anthropologists have changed their axis of study in solidarity of people from Argentina, Chaco, from the Aztec, or from people from indigenous origins in Mexico. Universities should do this. Universities should be careful with those who ask questions and researchers, because different peoples have different relationships with nature, and they have things to teach others, and their knowledge is not recognized by the so-called official education. So there's power to collaborate, and there are some fields of study like anthropologists and other professionals are encouraged to start questioning the status quo, and they're starting to question the very questions research is asking, because it's from the point of view of Caucasians. So it's very interesting to, it's not interesting to just know who are the indigenous people and how many are them. No, we have to get to know linguistic, social, and cultural aspects of those peoples. In Mexico, we have kind of a simulation of this surge. The current government decided to build a railway in a specific land without questioning the indigenous peoples who live in those areas. The president decided about this with a small group of people. So it's very important to think about how to create new knowledge that opens up new possibilities of political participation. So we have to ask questions that include indigenous aspect, that include the form, the way in which those people think of nature, the university, and capitalism. So I think that we have to, all the universities have to be solidary to this issue, this question.
Macaé, Ailton.
Macaé, Ailton.
Você tem que ligar o microfone, Ailton.
Querida Macaé.
Dear Macaé.
Quer iluminar a paisagem? eu queria trazer alguns dados aqui, acho que eu posso trazer, sobre a questão do acesso à educação.
I'd like to bring some data here on the access of education for the higher education for indigenous people. Okay, just to continue this conversation of Canclini, I think it is interesting just for us to bring us some more data on the subject. We've amplified the number of indigenous people in the universities. In 2017, we came to 56,000 36,000 indigenous people, but they're mostly in private higher education institutions. In the public educations, this increase happened mostly given law 2711 of 2012, which was the quotas law that was followed by a disposition that was the creation of a permanent grant on a specific value for indigenous people. We have two characteristics when we think on access to school education for indigenous people in Brazil. We have, in the area of the formation of indigenous teachers, we have the building up of authorizations to teach that are specifically to host indigenous students. But we have another modality for universities, which is the modality of opening additional vacancies in the regular courses. Apart from the quotas, besides the quotas, or added to quotas, some universities began to execute this exercise, which is vacancies for regular courses. So you have a medicine course, and then you open 2 vacancies, 3 vacancies for indigenous students. Now, what's the issue here? This medicine course continues with the same characteristics it's always had, the same organization in its curriculum, right? You don't think of a dialogue on the knowledges that are being acquired. Everything you have there, when you think of the potential for knowledge acquirement on the part of the indigenous populations of Brazil about the body, anatomy, health, that just doesn't go into the studies, doesn't go into the curricula of the medical schools. And also it doesn't get into the nursing schools. We participated in a debate about the indigenous university, and many of the things that we discussed took us into, we had to think and design things in a different way, because there's so much bureaucracy that is designed within a university, that any possibility to build up dialogue systems and to think on exchanges, the bureaucratic studies, the bureaucratic structure doesn't make it possible for us to make it viable. We could have some flexibility in some designs of the federal institutions that would be a bit more, shall I say, more flowing, to the sense of we being able to establish that exchange. I believe that there are many people in Brazil, for example, Eliana and Jair, whom we work with, we have thought of how to come to the building of a university from the peripheries. Well, thinking on the potential that we have in the periphery zones of Brazil, how to think of a university that can have a dialogue with everything that is done and produced in these university spaces, coming from the logics and the organizations of the cultural producers, the artists, the women of these communities who have a number of knowledges. And how could we bring this pedagogy and these organizational logics into the universities? I think this is an exercise which some universities can advance more into. Another issue dealing more with the indigenous issues is that, for example, for us to constitute such a network in Brazil nowadays, let's imagine we have the Ticuna people, for example, right? In the Amazon, for example. But many times where we have teachers that work with the Ticuna people, many times in universities where you have research or a history that was constituted, these teachers might be inside University of São Paulo, or they might be in Rio Grande do Sul, far away south. We don't work with the logics that the teachers could circulate, could go around. It's so tied up, you know, that to advance a little bit in that, we were able to get to a design in which we made a program that was called Indigenous Knowledges in School. And then we constituted it as if it was several nuclei of universities and cooperation among universities, but these nuclei were totally different one from another. You could incorporate a university from Rio Grande do Sul in the south, or University of Minas Gerais in the center, and University of São Paulo. And if we were to make a work, for example, with the Yanomami people, testing different areas of knowledge, you know. So there is a number of mechanisms that we exercise that need to be at the same time deconstructing the logics of the state, the bureaucratic logics that is imposed, because it seems like it was made just so that it isn't possible for anything else to happen. In fact, because of money, the financial flows. If we think that there are populations that have another way to relate with among themselves and with us, so we would need to pay for an air ticket, you know. So we lived a lot of that also. Jason lived through that. You have to pay for the ticket because I have to bring an indigenous teacher from the north of Minas Gerais. And the bureaucracy for getting this ticket, you have to have an invoice for that ticket, right? Whew. You know, the trail we have to follow, you know, is like a pilgrimage. So maybe he takes a bus, and maybe he could find food in the middle of the road. And then he'll have to render accounts on what he did, how much he spent, and blah, blah, blah. And in the Amazon, he'd pick up a boat, small boat, you know, and the guy's his uncle. And there are places where the money, like, you know, coins, right? I worked in Benjamin Constant, in the middle of the Amazon. It's the municipality that can most take advantage of a bill of money, because that same bill is going to be passing through so many hands, you know, and it wasn't substituted. It was old. It was falling apart, you know. There is no credit card or debit card. It's no way. They can't use these things. They're totally different people. You know? So, concretely speaking, you know, you have to think of these very simple things, you know, very day-to-day things, day-to-day stuff, you know. And we have an abyss between them and whatever happening in the universities. In the country, what we see is a tendency that is stronger and stronger of thinking of a state with a market logics, you know, this market so-called, which we don't really know where it is, right? This market. Well, there was an economy without people. People aren't accounted for. The debate on economy, you know, became something so crazy, such an abstraction that many times is worth nothing. Lives don't matter. And if lives don't matter, what is the place for art or enchantment? Where do you find a place for forests, animals? You know, lives don't, you know, don't count. I'm in a state where we struggle against illegal mining, for example, and legal mining too, and a sea of eucalyptus planted trees. We have two challenges here that are immense here. What about university? To what measure has it leaned upon that? You know, we have thousands of municipalities here in Minas Gerais, where people, for example, are in panic. There's a siren sounding and they have to flee from their houses because there'll be a bomb coming out of an open mine nearby. There are numberless defenders of human rights who are being threatened. Their lives are in danger. In Brazil, defenders of human rights are put to sacrifice. Every day, we can say, every day we have a story to tell about this. Today, there was the assassination of a human rights defender who militates in the area of de-incarceration, a woman who fights against incarceration, which is an absurd thing, of Black people being put in jail. And she was defending that. Well, she was killed. And I keep thinking, you know, what is the university, or what university can there be? What university? We need a university that cannot deal with all these issues. Let that be a question. Let that be an issue. I don't know if Ailton wants to talk, but there are two questions coming from the same person. Questions that have been very well formulated, but I think it is important to put forth these questions before closing, right? So what you bring, Macaé, is really the relationship with reality, right? Never before had I been so attentive to the relationship between the University of São Paulo and our teachers there who denominate them to qualify themselves as Black, right? It's a very small rate. It's 2.7%. Where are the Indians now in the university? There is this fear that Ailton talked about, which is the transformation of this young indigenous person that goes to university, yes, but he comes out with a varnish around him, iced. It's a mechanism, a black box, as repeating what Ailton was saying, Ailton, that doesn't necessarily generate pertaining. So the question that Lucas Nibering, who's a graduate student of University of São Paulo, he was just graduated, he was my student. No, it's not a black box, it's a white box as you have in there. Yeah, it's a white box, yes. It's deeper, even more mysterious. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Martin, it should be an opaque box, right? At least. Yeah. Yeah, we are, you know, lapidating the terms here, yes. Well, what Lucas tells me is the hosting of other cosmologies and the intervention of new technologies may fortify the bridges between academy, universities, and society. So, yeah, I just wanted to say something that is interesting, you know. What was clear with this exchange of us here today, Nestor talked about this reinvention. Macaé also mentioned the reinvention, and Ailton himself and the artist, because sometimes I see art as a virus. He works in this system, in these systems, and causes disturbing the systems. But I still think whether we are still able to create an operational system that would be in the university or outside it, a system that could embrace this richness and of our realities, as were brought by you this afternoon. This is a compliment, but it does dialogue with the question by Lucas about whether technology could strengthen the relationships between academy, university, and society, together with these several knowledges and other cosmologies, which university totally refuses to share and to work with. Well, let's Ailton, let Ailton speak. Yeah, speak. Yes, Lucas, this may happen, but if the experience from inside these new technologies is willing to accomplish this maneuver that Martin talked about. So try to develop operational systems where the access to these new technologies, in case IT, sorry, that doesn't, but as long as it doesn't create 4.5 million youngsters and adolescents that would be out, excluded from school because they don't have access to internet, simply have no way to access. There was data that 4.6 million students have no way to access their classes. Their classes are remote, but they have no way to access them. And so people are talking about donating equipment for these kids. But the issue that Martin brings is not to donate equipment, but how to think to make this access possible without having to be submitted to this merchandising regime. Otherwise, everything becomes merchandise. We will fill the market with new gadgets. Néstor? Yes.
Néstor?
Sí, ¿se oye?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. No, I thought I had deactivated the voice. Okay, Dario.
Me gustaría ver aquí un juego entre...
I'd like to see a sort of a game among other forms of periphery, besides the physics of the margins, the borders of cities, or the borders of society, and the territorial residents, and the enormous peripheries of society that now constitute the population of youngsters who are jobless and without licensing by the academy, and many others who do have this licensing, in fact, up to a doctor's degree, but cannot get a job, or only can get informal temporary jobs without any security, medical assistance. And there are several ways of being peripheral, you see. And I put all of these, and this could be a trans class observation. There is a systematic discrimination by towards people who cannot have access to the work market, the labor market, right? This is very complex, but there are some correlations that can be made. There are no good retirement systems in the greater part of the Latin American countries, Mexico and so many others. So there is an impossibility that teachers who are older than 60 years of age get retired, because retirement funds are very scarce. And you open no new places for young people should become members of the teaching corps of universities also, right? Being young is not enough to, there is an enormous sector that is excluded, right? And this has to do with one of the places where youngsters were able to insert themselves more creatively and more massively, which are the digital networks that are not only new ways of communicating contents, but communicating in networks to be outside the hierarchies and the conventional buildings of the bureaucracy, and to introduce more mobilization and virtual manifestations, say, interruptions of the hierarchical, patriarchal, white order produced by actions, and producing therefore actions in society. I believe that there is an enormous responsibility on the institutions that already exist, both public and private, and intercultural, the indigenous ones, to relate in a new way as to what can be done with virtual and non-virtual classes, so that we can deactivate old ways of learning and activate new ones with network communications in places that are controlled by the corporations. That you have to take that into account, not only the industrial corporations that are very much present in the interviews that Muntada made, but also electronic corporations who convert us from citizens into simple algorithm elements. You know. What can we do with the excess of information that are provided by all these digital gadgets? And here I point out a tweet that was sent, something that is key in the network that in which we see university inserted, not a production of knowledge, but a place where there is opening for the questions made by social sectors, but also where you edit knowledge to other goals, towards other goals, in a new way to manage knowledge. Sorry. Macaé, would you like to say something? No.
Martin. Un pequeño comentario.
I would just like to make a comment, a small comment. I think it would be interesting, Martin, that you could, as part of the project and of the roundtables, to recollect, to gather what questions there are that are convenient, that are interesting for Brazil. There has been a number of considerations and a number of situations produced by context that makes it for interesting, not just to remake the project for Academia Brazil, but also to gather a number of questions that would be key for what could become a reformulation in the sense of alternative interventions, a number of new operational processes, and a number of concepts that I believe are important to check and that should be referred to as part of the research. So I hand over the floor to you. Very well. The task was received. Yes. And in any case, with the debate that we're holding here in this afternoon, I believe that much material has been produced, and this is not only being recorded, but the idea is to transcribe this and perhaps relate this as a contribution to your work, Muntada, considering your trajectory around the globe. You're a defender of the planet, really, because you have this role of making the connection between different systems, different peoples, as Macaé was saying, about the difficulty of us getting to know each other, being in different ways, being in different places. And this is something you do that I've always been an admirer of. And as an example, really, we're coming to the end of our event. We had only these two questions of Lucas.
Eu acho que talvez é uma maneira de nós terminarmos aqui a nossa tarde com uma pergunta que é bastante direta em
relação. It would be
relação.
interesting to finish this afternoon with a question that is very near the reality.
Dessa relação, assim, pelo menos eu imagino, Ailton, que nós somos capazes de.
I imagine, Ailton, that we are capable of developing a new operational system together with other operational systems that could work in a partnership with humanity, you know. So the question for Lucas is as follows: how to make the criticism to the academy as an institution in a moment of institutional fragility that is generalized and democratic instability. I think this criticism by Muntadas happens not only with Muntadas' work, but this afternoon in itself. And there's a complementary question that we might finish with. How to recover the image of institutions in face of public opinion? I think that's a good question for all of us. And I don't know who would like to put something forth about this, you know, public image of the institutions. Once more, thanking for your presence and the public that is seeing us, and as well as the translators that are following us during this part, whether it is Portuguese or Spanish. I believe, Martin, that is a question for you to answer. Myself? Who? Why? Because I believe that you are right in the middle of the situation. So I think that this question, the perspective of understanding different context, you know, or knowing different context, you are in an honest situation in order to answer for that. Yes, Muntadas, but the very research that is being developed in the IEA has direct relationships with this institutionality. What Lucas put forth is how can we recover the institution, the public institution? We have several institutions. We have Macaé, and it was very good, Macaé. I didn't describe you too well, you know, but you made it very clear that you're a teacher and you are in the field, on the field, and you're in touch with reality. Ailton, I can't even describe you because you are all over the place, right? In spirit and in your words and in your posture as well. I believe that each one of us believe somehow in institutions, Muntadas, and not a single one, whether it be called a black box or white box or gray box. But we wouldn't be here if we weren't concerned about the university, right? So a 3-hour discussion that we've had here is regarding these institutions. So I leave it for you. Well, many times I think as to the way people organize themselves, and we see this historically. We see situations in which where it's not an issue of questioning, but organizing and looking for alternatives. I think that is important. In the 70s, when I got to New York, the world of art was only in museums and galleries. And everybody who was making an work in a certain way that could be in a certain way qualified as diverse. We had difficulty in meeting. And we reformulated the idea of alternative spaces, and we organized, we organized ourselves. It was a very important moment for the whole work that was made in the 70s for art. Everything that we're going through now on the point of view of art has to do with that period. And it was because people got organized. They looked for the spaces And it was organized, and why not? With yeah, why not? The same teaching or schooling can be reorganized from looking for methods and formulas and situations and proposals that could be alternative to the established order. Right? Well. Macaé. Yeah, I will say something else. I think in a very brief way, I can say that that we know the situation and the tension we're going through in Brazil politically. But this criticism that I think we established here this afternoon is precisely because the university needs to strengthen itself, right? But to strengthen, in my understanding, is not just in any way we can find, no. In universities, many times are treated as universities as reference in Brazil. So we should de-invest these universities, but because they're totally privatized and to the service of some few companies. Not at the service of companies, but of a very small group of enterprises. In fact, when we make this criticism, is to criticize and centralize. I try to invent a word for it. It's not a university. It should be a pluriversity. We have to reinvent the words, pluriversity. So when you asked, how can technology help at this time? I was thinking, which technology are we talking about here? Because I believe strongly that technologies can very much contribute to that, especially if we amplify our look as to what technology really is. If we think as to what technology of the peoples of the forest when we deal with forest, that's a technology that we should bring out to the world. That's the technology that we're looking for. How can you live together with the forest so many years and keep it standing? You know, that's the technology we want to support. Upstanding trees. That's the technology, and I'm talking about the point of view. You know, a specific place which is popular. So I wonder. In the university is very much connected to something which is, what is the planet project that we need? Or will we continue with this madness that will make the earth, you know, disappear? That's the issue, or the big issue for me. And then I think, well, if university can't deal with what we are trying to do, then it won't be able to face the economic power that is outside. If the university can't deal with us, how can they deal with the economic power outside? Very good. That question, obviously, you know, your justification in face of the erosion that we live in the relationship between society and its institutions, when we come to understand that there is a serious illusion on the part of people and deception on the and deceiving on the part of the people as to their institutions, seems to be conservative, or it may seem conservative. So how can we make institutions to continue to be respected and continue to be well evaluated? Well, let us think why or what would motivate our effort to preserve institutions which in themselves cannot join gather the confidence, the empathy, and the trust of the environment in which it works. Let's say the organs are demoralized, and everybody, the banks were demoralized, and everybody goes make a campaign to raise up the banks again. No, their crisis is because banks live out of, just sucking out the people's lives. 400,000 people in Brazil are in debt with the banks. Well, in fact, 400,000 people are the ones who have money in Brazil, and they should open their coffers, their piggies. And these solid institutions could continue if they open their doors to people. The institutions that we're defending here, science, technology, universities, the academy, are institutions that have had the capacity and the potency in themselves to affect society. Therefore, it should affect society in a positive way. When it's not affecting society positively, that's why Macaé said that if they can't, face the debate we're having here, they've been extinct already. Extinct. When I published a small text pointing at the end of the world, I didn't point only to the university. I pointed at the World Bank and others, to these structures that support global capitalism. Why am I interested in surviving of these institutions if they haven't done anything other than up to the 20th century without ensuring the world and the people? Thinking of the permanence of the institutions is okay, as long as they think of us, the people. So we have to develop what in poetry is called to develop affectuous relationships. No institutions that can give back to social welfare regarding the meaning of life has to be protected. Otherwise, we'll have to protect the armed forces, right? What about that? It's an institution that's very solid. When it starts to fall, what am I going to do? Raise them again? So that they can continue buying guns? So from where do we want to strengthen the institutions? Is it how do they operate these institutions? No, banks have earned a lot of money during the pandemics. You'll see the closing, the balance of the banks. They make a lot of money. Why don't they pick up a little of that balance and distribute it among people who are dying in the sidewalks? I think the institution like the World Bank is to let go the favorable conversation of the conversation with things that are external to the debate. But there are 400,000 people who are being buried. And there are several of our indigenous relatives, brothers, sisters, friends, parents, who are resentful and who really believe that institutions owe to the society, that the institutions owe to the society. When I made a criticism as to the role of science made in universities and corporations, I'm not just trying to destroy science. No, science is knowledge, is acknowledgement, but cannot be kidnapped by corporations, because then we have to make a responsible criticism to this situation of surrendering of science to the interest to the corporate interest that harms the common interest and also harms our common experience to be the inhabitants of a planet Earth that breathes. And many of these institutions forget that the planet breathes. I don't know if it leaked to you while I spoke, a horn, a car horn. Sorry, not a car horn, a horn itself. That is a horn from Vale do Rio Doce, a warning of an explosion or something. I'm not going to defend it. I could speak for almost half an hour without hearing about Vale do Rio Doce, but it denounced itself with this horn, you know. This is the horn announcing 5 o'clock, a change of shift. Macaé made an introduction that Minas Gerais is being responsible by several people. Drummond said someone died crying and nobody saw her. Thank you, Ailton. I don't know if Néstor wants to say some last words before we go to Ari, who will finalize our session here. Yes, you can hear me, right? It seems to me that it is a key thing, what Ailton said, lastly, to change the question. Instead of asking how to improve the image of universities in face of society, no institution that makes sense for life. We, the institutions, have a very well elaborated number of discussions as to understand what our sense is, what meaning do we have. And this can be answered in several ways, but this sense, this meaning, is built socially. Yesterday, I was talking to one of the best writers, Mexican writers, Convilloro, and he said, I'm astounded that the demand of artists in Mexico are because they took away their grants, they don't pay them, and they take their money elsewhere. The state is not giving us solutions as beneficiaries of our culture. And so many people are saying, give me back my grant as an individual. And Villoro said, why do we want to have artists anyway? What is the result of those monies? That can be applied to universities too. What is universities doing? What are universities doing for city? For society? If it's not effective for society, then how can we reformulate the universities so that universities can be something else? Of course, it's urgent, but with other projects for knowledge, for other questions that we might search in other knowledges. Thank you, Néstor. Ari, to finish. First, I would really thank you for those who have enriched this afternoon with such an important panel. And if you permit myself. My comment, dear Muntadas, one of the 15 questions that you made, that you put forth, the university, institution versus corporation.
No caso das universidades públicas, o dilemma
in Brazil, in the case of public universities, the dilemma is not between institution and corporations. But the problem is corporation and institution. There's a number of rules of administrative, public administration, with mechanisms for control which are not respectful of academic characteristics and of academic characteristics, but which presently have hindered the role as you put a point in, and now Ailton is stating very clearly, which is the relevance. To be able to fit the rules in which very rigid rules, which are really like jails, then the universities have had a big difficulty in keeping their character of being relevant. And what seems to be in the organization of an institution is that the organization, when it disappears, nobody really cares. As Ailton said, it disappears, well, that's it, it went off. But as an institution, it exists because it is relevant for an important segment of society and will be defended by those segments of society. And for a long time, universities have had that characteristic. And I feel that nowadays, the university is threatened by the bureaucratic rigidity that becomes the nexus of university in itself. As a footnote, I don't have shares in banks, or I'm not defending the banks, but in the beginning of the pandemic last year, there was a movement called Everybody for Health, which was leveraged by a donation of 1 million reais by Itaú Bank. I don't know if it affected its profits, but when we look at it, there might be, in a bit dark scenario, there can be some luminous points, and I just remembered that for some reason, but that doesn't hinder your principal argument, yes. Now, I would like to thank everybody in UNAP for making this very special articulation. A very big pleasure to get to meet those who I hadn't had the pleasure to meet yet, personally. And I wish you all a very good weekend, and especially good health to everybody. Thank you very much. I think Muntadas, very clearly, please, very quickly, please, because we're going to finish. You're phoneless. Microphone, please, Muntadas. Somebody tell him. I think he's got a delay. The microphone. Yeah, activate the microphone. It's off.
Muntadas, não. Você conseguiu e voltou. Clique só.
¿Ahora?
Sí.
Bueno, quería que estoy de acuerdo con lo que dice Ari en el sentido de decir.
I agree with Ari, with what he said about the relationship. The United States, in the United States, institution versus corporation, in the project, from the beginning, we have a very, very important contextuality. In the context, this dialectics is not a reality, but be careful, because in Europe, also, when it was presented, there were discrepancies on part of the public universities, with which I'm totally in agreement with, because they said that the public institution is important to be defended. We're totally in agreement with that, but the strength of the economy and the market makes it for the very same European universities are embracing American models, North American models. That's why I agree with what you said, but be careful because things sometimes pick up some influences of which we are not aware, which may perform in a surprising way. Institutions versus corporations might not be relevant in Brazil. It is relevant in the United States project, because there, as I said before, economy commands in a tremendous way within the academy.
Muntadas, então.
Very well, Muntadas. Shall we then go on to the closure of this event? And I thank you again. And I'm sorry if I couldn't permit more space for us to continue debating, but for the structure of IEA this afternoon, we have to close at this exact moment. So I would like to thank you all for permitting the composition of this marvelous board. And I hope Eliana is better now, and for the translation team that followed us this afternoon, as well as the IEA Commission and the Permanent Forum, who in the site are getting more and more authorizations. And in particularly, I would like to tell Assis that he bravely helped us at any time to make these uploads and these updatings. And for the public, we've had a good audience during the whole of the afternoon. And I remind you that on the 10th of May, we will have 2 more reunions like this. The information is on the site. And so, Sergio, you might finish our transmission and we can stay here to talk about